Up next on The Reveal, a mother's plea.
I was in there when they was working on Tina, and the last words I remember, she looked at me and she held out and she said, "Mama, help me."
Why a deadly stretch of road remains a problem for drivers years after dangers exposed. Then it is in the science that saves lives and preserves justice.
I remember sitting there at the computer just looking at it forever. I mean, for the longest time, I'm like, how could this be? Could this even be right?
But what happens when the DNA evidence thought to be exact turns out to be wrong? Then sadness and tragedy.
It's like pouring gasoline on it and lighting it on fire.
How a struggle with mental illness and grief leads to a 400-mile journey for answers and awareness.
From our Midtown studios in Atlanta, The Reveal begins now with our multi-Emmy and National Mural Award-winning team of investigators.
Welcome to The Reveal. I'm Andy Perotti. A Georgia grandmother claims a state agency broke its promise to fix a dangerous stretch of road that killed nearly everyone in her family. In 2016, Tina Butler and her 2 children died in Miller County when their vehicle hydroplaned on a state road due to poor drainage. The state said it would fix the road, but 4.5 years later, nothing has changed.
And this is the way they came going home, the way what we going now.
Melanie Stevenson takes us on a drive she's dreading to make. On a stretch of road she typically avoids at all costs.
That's all I think about.
To the exact spot in Miller County, Georgia that changed her life.
That truck went off right in here somewhere is when it went off, started flipping, and it landed up right there.
It wasn't her inside the SUV, it was her daughter and 2 grandchildren. It happened on April 2nd, 2016 on Highway 91.
Accident 16-22. Vehicle 1 was traveling northbound.
This is video recorded by a state investigator showing what the road looks like when it's dry. But on the day of the crash, it rained a lot. And Melanie's daughter's fiance, who was driving and not familiar with the area, did not see water on the road when he tried to pass a vehicle ahead of him.
Vehicle hydroplaned and overturned in the ditch full of water.
Inside the Lincoln Navigator, Zaya, a 2nd grader who loved to read, Mo, who just turned 1, and their mother, Tina, a nurse. All 3 did not survive.
I was in there when they was working on Tina, and the last words I remember, she looked at me and she held out and she said, "Mama, help me." And there was nothing I could do. Her blood pressure just was steady dropping.
Tina's family filed a lawsuit against the Georgia Department of Transportation, claiming the agency knew about the road's poor design and that water would routinely overflow into GDOT's right-of-way and cross the highway when it rains. Nearby residents had complained about the draining for years, including Mary White, who lives about a football field away. Prior to the accident, you called DOT complaining.
Yes, I used to call all the time. I didn't get no help.
So DOT knew about this problem on the road?
Yes.
They knew about the flooding?
Yes.
They knew about the lack of draining?
Yes.
Last year, the family settled the lawsuit for $2.5 million, one of the state's largest payouts ever. And the family wanted something else. As part of the settlement, they asked the state to promise to fix the road. According to the family, the state said it would, or so they thought. Since the accident, has anything changed?
No.
It's still flooding.
Yeah, see?
I feel like they don't care. They have families. They don't want to lose theirs. I done lost mine. Fix the road.
Are you nervous someone else is going to die?
It's going to happen. I know it's going to happen.
Georgia DOT declined interview requests for this story. Instead, an agency spokesperson emailed the Reveal to say, since 2019, GDOT has been active in a multi-part study evaluating this stretch of State Road 91 with the ultimate goal of identifying alternatives to reduce sporadic flooding at this location. In the meantime, it uses water over road signage to alert motorists of inclement conditions, just as it did in 2016 when rain dumped 6 inches of water on the road the day of the crash.
If it rains anymore, it's gonna come across the road.
The day Melanice took us to the accident scene, water nearly covered her family's memorial, a reminder of what contributed to the death of her daughter and grandchildren is far from fixed, potentially putting others at risk. If you could say anything to DOT, what would you say to them?
I would tell the DOT, if y'all would please fix this problem, because I don't want this to happen to somebody else. If not do it for me, do it for my kids.
State records show since 2015, claims have nearly doubled against Georgia's DOT, costing taxpayers $12 million. The agency points out that of the nearly 4,500 claims that have been filed against it over the past few years, the majority of them were rejected. Coming up, it's a pain no parent or child should have to endure.
For 20 years, my son grew up not knowing who his father was. At some point, they need to take responsibility for what they've done.
DNA is supposed to be the gold standard, but it turns out there's sometimes a serious flaw in the forensics ahead. We rely on DNA testing to prove paternity, innocence, and guilt. But a recent investigation finds DNA tests are not always correct, and a secretive system hides errors from public view. Charlotte Huffman from our sister station in Dallas explains the struggles with this science.
Most people think DNA test results are correct. For 12-year-old Matthew Wilson, a DNA test showed his father wasn't his.
It broke my heart, I lost my dad and my best friend.
Let's rewind through Matthew's childhood back to the mid-90s. That's Matthew there on his dad Robert's shoulders. Here he is on his dad's lap. And this is the Father's Day card Matthew gave his dad that year. The two were close, but that all changed in 2001 when they took a DNA test. It was ordered by a Tarrant County judge as part of Matthew's parents' custody battle. To the family's surprise, the DNA test results showed there was a 0% chance that Robert was actually Matthew's father, shattering that close father-son relationship.
He was so confused. He was 12 years old.
That's Teresa, Matthew's mom. She spent years unable to answer questions from Matthew about his father.
And I blamed myself for so many years over this.
But then, just last year,
My granddaughter did an ancestry test because she wanted to know if she was Scottish.
oddly enough, the results from Teresa's granddaughter's at-home DNA kit revealed a genetic link between the granddaughter and Robert, the same man that a DNA test 20 years prior said was not a family member.
I remember sitting there at the computer just looking at it forever. I mean, for the longest time, I'm like, how could this be? Could this even be right?
A second paternity test from a different lab confirmed with 99.9% certainty that Robert was indeed Matthew's father all along. But by then, 20 years had passed and the damage was done.
I wish I could got to grow up with a father, but I didn't. They took that from me.
Matthew and his parents are suing the two companies involved in the original DNA test, DNA Testing Center and Louisville-based Biosynthesis. In court filings, the family alleges the two companies that took their DNA samples and analyzed them were negligent in obtaining, labeling, handling, testing, and reporting test results.
For 20 years, my son grew up not knowing who his father was. For 20 years, my son grew up angry. At some point, they need to take responsibility for what they've done.
Both companies declined our request for an interview, but in court filings, the attorney representing Biosynthesis said there is no evidence that Biosynthesis was negligent. A DNA expert affidavit found inside the court file and obtained by WFAA shows the genetic profiles from the 2001 and 2019 paternity tests are entirely different. DNA experts say this suggests the family samples could have been mixed up with another unsuspecting families. But without help from the labs involved, we'll likely never know what happened inside the lab, because our investigation found that getting any information, like inspection reports on labs that conduct DNA testing, is nearly impossible. Unlike state crime labs that do forensic testing for criminal cases, labs that do DNA testing aren't inspected by the government. They're inspected by private accrediting organizations, which means they're allowed to keep their inspection reports private. A 2006 report from the Government Accountability Office found that oversight of U.S. labs was not sufficient to ensure lab quality. Bottom line, the doctors and patients who use DNA labs have no way of knowing when mistakes are made. But mistakes do happen.
Anyone that does laboratory science like I do knows you screw up. I mean, everyone screws up from time to time.
UC Irvine professor Dr. Lawrence Muller has been tracking lab errors in DNA cases for years. He says there's no way to quantify just how many errors happen each year, but the American Association of Clinical Chemistry estimates 13 billion lab tests are performed each year in the U.S. So even a conservative error rate of just 0.005% amounts to 650,000 botched tests each year.
I think they're much more common than people think. It's usually a failure of the humans involved in this technology. They do things like mislabel samples or switch samples.
The idea that her family's samples could have been switched with another family's is what keeps Teresa up at night.
It breaks my heart to think that, and I hope that that's not true, because I know what we went through as a family.
There is no way to quantify how many errors there are each year, but the American Association for Clinical Chemistry estimates 13 billion lab tests are performed each year in the U.S., so even a conservative error rate of 0.005% amounts to 650,000 botched tests each year. It's a topic that doesn't get much news coverage.
When somebody's manic, whatever thought or idea you have is to the nth degree.
Up next, the new journey fighting the cycle of stigma surrounding mental illness.
For more on these investigations or to submit a tip to the Reveal team, text REVEAL to 404-873-9114 or email us at thereveal@11alive.com.
It's a topic shrouded in shame and stigma, suicide. The rate of deaths by suicide is steadily rising, and here in Georgia, that increase is significantly outpacing the national average. One Lawrenceville family is facing the aftermath of one of those deaths, but rather than hide their pain, they are using it to help others. Matt Pearl has their story.
They're all up early.
Open the lid.
Carrie Hannon fires up the smoker.
Our big brisket.
His wife, Sherry, starts a fire.
Definitely going to be an outside kind of weekend.
All right, good morning.
And their son, Will, prepares to ride.
Start of day 4, the final push home.
It's all for Luke.
A loss like this, if you don't handle it well, it can bleed into your whole life. I've gone through them occasionally.
The photos stay within reach. Photos of a boy, then a young man, smiling and living with the ones he loved most.
This is a favorite from a later year.
It reminds us of the happiest times with him, because he wasn't always sad. We had one bad year.
Yeah, it was a very
So.
one short bad year.
It started with anxiety, one panic attack 2 Januaries ago. It led to depression, hospitalization, and an episode of mania.
When somebody's manic, whatever thought or idea you have, it's to the nth degree. It's like pouring gasoline on it and lighting it on fire. You know, everything is blown way out of proportion.
Luke yelled, he threatened, he moved out, then came back. In photos, he smiled. In many, many moments, Sherry and Carrie feared the worst.
He called me and he said, "Have you heard from Luke?" And I said, "No." And he said, "I'm going to go home." But he never really leaves work. And he had run a couple of errands and he came home and there was a note on the table.
Today, at a tucked away spot in a park close to home, is a marker where last January, Luke Hannon took his life. He was 25.
The hard things to remember are really, really hard, but they're part of his journey. So, we have to remember those as well.
Luke was my adopted brother in a sense.
Will was adopted by the Hannons when he was 16. Luke was 3 years younger. The bond among all strengthened fast and holds strong.
After he passed, it was amazing to hear stories from people of which, Luke had randomly reached out to with no alternative motives other than just to offer kind words and a helping hand.
In July, Luke's family went rafting in the Grand Canyon and spread his ashes in the river. They keep chimes outside with his initials engraved. And this January, 1 year later, Will decided to ride his bike in Luke's honor from Jacksonville, Florida to Lawrenceville, Georgia. 400 miles in 4 days.
We put up the GoFundMe. I really thought, we'd get a couple $100. And when I looked at it this afternoon, I think we were approaching, $10,000.
Now it's $19,000 for the National Alliance on Mental Illness.
You can have memories of him and not be sad all the time. That's what we're trying to get to. The alternative is to forget about him, and I don't want to forget about him.
So the smoker blows, the fire burns, a crowd gathers.
That is my little brother Luke's hat right there on my handlebars.
And a grand gesture unfolds.
I hope you're watching over us and watching over me on this last 40 miles, and I know I'll be thinking about you, buddy.
Even in celebration, there is pain. There is always pain.
I'm so proud of you. Oh my God.
But there is also no choice but to forever remember.
I was having a hard time not crying for the last 20 miles. No doubt, man. He's always there with us.
Since the start of this journey, the donations continued to roll in. Will Jessup has now raised more than $20,000 in honor of Luke Hannon, all with the goal of helping raise awareness and to end the stigma of mental illness.
Turn around.
No.
Turn around. Our investigations have impact.
Is there a reason why you won't talk with me?
You've recently been indicted.
This is on the record. Change laws.
Don't you think someone needs to be held accountable for this?
I don't have any comments on that, sir.
Expose crimes. Crimes that lead to murder indictments.
We would not be able to prosecute this case without that video.
See the 11 Alive investigators change the face of local news.
Thank you for watching The Reveal, the only local weekly investigative show in the country. We'll see you right back here next week on The Reveal.